Today on the Rise of the Challenge podcast.
I was the one who asked my wife for a divorce because I felt that that was part of what was taking place. And this is not to place blame on her, not at all. It was two people just not making it work well. But yeah, yeah, it was a hard time. And when I think about that time, it gets me a little teary-eyed. It was very, very difficult for a number of years. And you just can't see the other side. And you think, how did I even get here?
Welcome to the Rise of the Challenge podcast. Joining today, he's an author and executive coach. It's Jake Stahl. How you doing today, Jake?
Good, Alex. Thank you for having me. This is quite an honor.
We're so excited to have you on the show to talk about your rise to the challenge. What we like to do with all of our guests is go right to the beginning. Talk about where you're from and what you like doing growing up.
Sure. I come from the backwoods of Pennsylvania, and growing up, I worked a lot. I started working when I was 11 years old and played sports, but a firm background in just work, hard work. I worked for my dad's pharmacy, and it taught me a good work ethic.
Did you always wanted to work at a young age? Did you like that kind of the skills that you could learn from working at a young age?
No, at 11, I just wanted to play, but dad had a business and he said, we need somebody to do stuff. And I got paid half of minimum wage to work.
Oh,
But
wow.
yeah, it teaches you a lot. And at the time, you don't want to learn it. But when you're older, it's like, yeah, I'm glad we went through that.
Was that a time with your father, like a bonding time working, or was it completely something different?
No, it was completely something different. Dad ruled with an iron fist, and we all knew it. And I hated being the boss's son, honestly. It was a huge burden, and everybody knew I was, and they treated me differently, and it wasn't a great scenario. But it also taught me a lesson about how to treat people later on in life, and how their perception of me changed the way they listened to me.
You talked about that. I helped my dad when he worked at a granite company. So on Saturdays, you're out of school as a young kid and you're like, you just want to enjoy it. Nope. I went to my dad's work and worked the front office. And usually I got paid in like food, which is totally
Right.
because I got lunch out of it. But you talked about how people treat you because
Yeah.
you are that person's family member. And I always
Yeah.
thought that I didn't see it that way for me, but I don't know if they really understood why I was there. They kind of were like, you could have just left him at home. But I think over time, when they kept seeing me more and more, they kind of grew to me and they kind of became friends
Yeah.
over time. So it's
Yep.
interesting the different dynamics, but in similar situations.
Yeah, and I did become friends with the staff, but there was always that little tiptoe effect.
Yeah.
And especially until people knew that they could trust that I'd just keep my mouth shut and they could keep doing what they were doing.
As you're growing up, did you have anyone that was a big inspiration for you? Someone that was a motivator, someone that really kind of told you the ropes?
My dad was a very big person in the local community. He was head of Rotary, did his time with Chamber of Commerce, part of fundraising events all over. So I think I had a lot of role models. The people that he used to associate with in Rotary were all super important men in the area. And the town I grew up in was so small
Mhm.
that the big men in your area were just who you looked up to because you didn't know anything outside the area. I always joke around that I didn't leave my hometown. I got paroled from it. It was it was almost like a prison. If you never thought outside the town, you never had any hopes of getting outside the town. And I don't mean to demean my hometown. I'm just saying that when you have little access to the outside world, what you have inside your world is what you have to look up to.
Did you feel a lot of pressure because of a person of that town is someone that is your father? So anything you do could be a bad reflection on him.
Oh yeah, and we were reminded of that constantly. I remember I got pulled over one time for speeding, and I wasn't going that fast. I think it was like 28 in a 25 school zone. It was something pretty minor. And the guy pulled me over and he saw who I was, and he was bent on making me a lesson. And that's okay. He's doing his job. I don't have a problem with that. But I didn't even get a chance to tell my dad when he had found out.
Oh,
And then that goes pretty quick. And in all honesty, I was never known as Jake. I was always known as Pete's kid. So you didn't even really have an identity to speak of. And I think that's half the reason I moved out of town later in life. It was a quest to just become your own person.
And that's so hard with the identity part
It
because
is.
you can't do anything to be yourself. It's always, oh, you're like you said, Pete's kid. And that's just,
Yeah.
it's so hard with a lot of these kids. Like, even if you see them on like TV shows and stuff, and like their parents are celebrities, it's like, oh, you're just that person's kid.
Right. Yeah.
They don't get to know you as who you are because you have that reflection on that person that is basically well known or someone that is a bigger figure than you.
Yeah, and you have the added complication that they're so successful in the town you're in that you have that bar
Yep.
that you're supposed to live up to and exceed. And my dad's business was a really large business. And I didn't want to take over the business. And of course, that was an added pressure too. So, yeah, there was a lot of pressure going up to meet certain standards and a lot of questions as to why aren't you taking over your dad's thing?
Not taking your dad's business. Sometimes we're asked that fun question, what is that dream job? What was that dream job for you?
I will tell you better what it wasn't. And it
Okay.
wasn't doing what he did. My dad was a pharmacist and his business was amazing. And the town loved him and he loved them. But the thought of standing behind a counter all day counting pills just really held no joy for me. So I wasn't sure what it was until I got into sales and sales training. And then it was a love affair from the word go. But at the time I didn't like what I was doing. I had no idea what it was I wanted to do.
Did you go through the education or right into the sales job?
I went right into a sales job. Um, I always felt I was always selling things because whatever we did affected the family name. So I was always trying to sell them on letting me do certain things. And I wasn't very good at it.
Mhm.
Um, one of the big things was always kids were to be seen and not heard. So half the time you were just supposed to be quiet and sit there. And I don't want to sound like I had a bad childhood. I really didn't. But later on when I started selling my first product, it's like, wow, I think I'm really good at this. And I was. It turned out to be a lifelong career and getting into training people to sell and then eventually helping executives sell themselves in their business was just huge. It was a revelation that came to me just all on its own.
With these items, products that you were selling, where did you come up with those ideas? Or what background or experiences would you say played a big part in going to these executives and being able to sell them on how to grow their business?
It's without a doubt, it goes back to my dad. My dad could talk to anybody. And out of the thousands of people that walked through his store, he knew them all. He knew every one of them by name. He'd greet them as they came in. They knew him and his name. So I think I got my ability to talk to everybody from him. And so it seemed natural. You know, it's the whole nature versus nurture thing.
Mhm.
Um, I believe I had it in my nature, but I think the nurture part of it was just I worked with him in the pharmacy till I was 18. So 7 years of watching how he related to people and big business people coming through, you almost can't not absorb it.
When did you feel that sales maybe wasn't that route for you anymore? Did you keep going and you're still doing it today and you really have found that passion within?
Well, I think it depends on how we define sales and not to get too in the weeds with this, but I think a lot of people think of sales as a negative connotation, but we're all selling all the time,
Mhm.
right? We're always selling each other, where should we go for dinner? And I want to have kids and I want to get married. So you're always selling. But I think for me, the conversion happened with a company I was working for. They just came to me one day and they said, do you want to be a field trainer? And I was young and I'm like, yeah, sure. Is it a raise? I mean, sure, I'll take the job. But the problem was I didn't know how to convert what I did to other people. I had no idea how to say, well, I do this, you should do it too.
Mhm.
And being so young, you just think everybody should do what you do. You know all the answers, so that's the way it's supposed to be. But it led to a pursuit of a psychology degree and neurolinguistic programming, and I became a true student of nature. And that's the passion I came. So I don't know if I left sales. I'm selling in a different way now, but now I'm training people on how to do it themselves, whether they're selling their company to a venture capitalist or they're just trying to sell a product that has a long life cycle, or a guy trying to sell his wife that he wants to go to Hawaii versus, North Carolina for the holidays.
Going into that route, sometimes with professions, it can take over our lives and people focus on that.
Oh
If
yeah.
that's something for you where kind of the profession took over and it really affected your personal life.
Yeah, and to be honest with you, I don't know. I apologize for that. I don't know if I ever stop trying to train. Um, I have a German Shepherd, and I really went out of my way to train her. And she learns, she has 20 commands, and she can walk by my side through a crowd with no leash and be great. And I have 4 kids, so you're always trying to train them. And then you do it for your profession, for your 60-hour work week. So you do it then. So I don't know if I ever stop doing it. And I think you're always trying to train yourself, right?
Mhm.
Talk to yourself better, eat better, lose weight, gain weight, do work on the house. I'm not sure training ever stops for me, either wanting to do it for myself or doing it to other people.
With having that kind of mindset with the training 24/7, did that play an effect with like your kids and how they were raised, or did it not even like really mess with them because they didn't even notice it was happening?
Yeah, they didn't even notice it was happening, but it did take a toll after a while. And the toll was that I tried to start controlling everything, so now I can do this, and now let me have an effect here and let me have an effect there. And I would say in my 30s, maybe my 40s, it got a little out of hand. And I don't mean out of hand in a bad way. I just meant I tried to control so much that it caused just a boatload of stress. And it was something I had to come over. Uh, and to be honest with you, if we're talking frankly on your show, I didn't do that very well either. I've learned a lot of lessons. And I think the past 10 years, I've done better than my previous 40 years.
What did that stress lead towards? Did it kind of take you down a spiral downhill, or did it kind of take you off track to what your mission was?
I think it's both. Uh, it definitely took me on a spiral downhill. There was a point where I lost pretty much everything. Lost my house, lost my marriage, um, really didn't have a ton of savings to speak of. And it was a turning point. But when I look back on it, it's staggering to me that it was probably the best thing that ever happened. I didn't think so then. But when I look back at now, I think, if my life would have continued the trajectory, I wouldn't be anywhere near where I am today. At least I don't think I would be. So I spent about 2.5 years in this this destructive mode until I finally came out the other side. But it took a toll. But now I'm remarried. My business is, God, doing 4 times what it ever did before. I get calls all the time. I get lucky enough to be on podcasts here like yours, keynote speaking events. Life has turned around dramatically, but there was a time I wasn't sure I was going to get here.
With each item you mentioned about losing it all, was there one specific one that kind of felt like not a rock bottom, but it's like okay, this is getting serious and I need to kind of start repairing as quickly as I can?
I will tell you, Alex, it all happened pretty quick together. My marriage was heading downhill for years, so I kind of figured that was heading to an end event. But when I got to the point where I could no longer afford my house, I couldn't keep a job. Um, if the basement had a basement, that's kind of where I was. I don't even think rock bottom says the true definition of where I was at that point. But it all turned out to be a lesson, some just hard cosmic spanking, if you will, and telling me to stop be that brat and turn things around. But it was hard. It took years. I'm not going to lie, and it took the wonderful woman I'm working married to right now to help me make those final steps out of who I was to who I am now.
Your story really capitulates on Rise to the Challenge, where you went through those challenges, but you rose up to it because there's a lot of people that were involved, that were your kids, your ex-wife at the time, and now your new wife, really seeing the new version of what you're going through. I think people listening, if they're going through those challenges, I think a lot of times they want to snap of the fingers, oh, it's cleared, oh, it's better. And it doesn't happen that way. But
Yeah.
it just shows that if you're determined to make it right, you're going to find that route to get there. You're going to overcome it because you're passionate about getting there. Was now where you are today, how is the control aspect? Are you alleviating control? Do you still have that personality, but it's more in a safe way than before?
Yeah, it's more calculated now. Um, I remember a quote years and years and years ago that kind of got me on the right path. And somebody said to me, "You really like to control things." And I said, "Well, then I know nothing's going to go wrong. And if it does, I
Yeah.
know I'm to blame." And they said, "How exhausting that must be." And, after I got done talking to them, I actually cried a little bit. I thought, this is exhausting. I never really thought about it that way before. And Alex, you're right. It's not just a snap of the fingers. This was a million small, tough decisions. And I was the one who asked my wife for a divorce because I felt that that was part of what was taking place. And this is not to place blame on her, not at all. It was two people just not making it work well. But yeah, yeah, it was a hard time. And when I think about that time, it gets me a little teary-eyed. It was very, very difficult for a number of years. And you just can't see the other side. And you think, how did I even get here?
As a
It's hard.
as a speaker with doing keynote speaking, where's your message that you focus on? Is it more from the business side, or do you talk more about how the business and personal side can come together in a way? Where's your main focus with that?
The main focus on melding my business and personal.
The speaking, like when you're doing speaking opportunities,
Oh,
where do you
okay.
focus that message? Is it more on the business side than the personal or the mixture?
It depends on the audience. Like I had two speaking engagements so far this year, and both of them were really personal. Both of them were just, listen, this is how we need to talk to one another and communicate. And I teach a lot about listening skills, active listening. And I teach a lot of neurolinguistic programming. So, how can we speak to someone else's language and make sure that we're on the same wavelength?
Mhm.
But I have a couple of speaking engagements coming up this year where it's all for fractional people. How do you succeed? How do you get beyond yourself? How do you get beyond imposter syndrome to actually be successful at what you're doing? How do you do new biz dev? And I will tell you, Alex, it's a great combination. I like talking from the personal side, but I also love talking business.
When people hear you're speaking, what do you feel when they come up to you and kind of really take in that message that they have heard?
It's funny because I still find it a little surprising. You find it surprising that another human you may not know as well or not know at all would take your advice and take your story.
Mhm.
I can't speak for everybody, but I don't think what I do is that special. I think it's just something I inherently know and enjoy doing. But when other people take that message to heart and want to change their lives because of that, it's endearing. But there are times you just look and you go, wow, 10 years ago, man, nobody would have given me a second look in the condition I was in. And now it's a lot different. But I think something happens to you when you just get so beaten down and defeated, when you just have your face ground in the dirt. You have that choice of either saying, this is me now, this is the way it's going to be, or I'm going to gradually fight my way back. And it's a choice a lot of people make all the time. And I just think that fighting every day is super important.
Yep.
It's one day at a time.
Looking at more opportunities with speaking, is there a event at a stage that is that hopeful dream spot that you hope to speak at to really be able to share your message with that audience?
I have this dream of wanting to do a TEDx talk. I've never looked into it to see what the qualifications were, what you need to do, but I think I have that kind of tucked in my belt somewhere. Over the years, I've talked to audiences of 1,200 and audiences of seven. And I'm not sure the size matters. I think it's kind of how you feel when you're on stage. It doesn't surprise me at all that sports stars don't want to step away from the limelight,
Mhm.
because when you're up on the stage, it's just a whole different feeling. And especially when you're talking about something you love and you're passionate about, and you think, wow, who'd have ever thought they'd pay you to do this?
And especially with now people recording speakers, and then it
Yes.
goes on to multiple social media channels where you could be speaking in front of 100 people, but now thousands and millions
Right.
of people are now viewing it because of the outreach that that channel has. Like even with TEDx, there might be thousands in that audience, but you look at how many people actually view it after it happens, and it's just an amazing outreach that a bigger community can hear that message. And I think that shows the connection that basically what TED and TEDx have built is a community for every speaker out there.
Yeah, it's amazing. Uh, I just got published in a book that I co-authored, and I'm writing another one. And the gentleman who's guiding me through the process and published the book, he's done a TEDx talk. He's just a fascinating individual, but yeah, it's kind of a something I aspire to do one day.
Talking about writing a book or co-authoring, when did that opportunity come about? And was that always in the plans for you?
It was always in the plans, but I never thought it would actually happen. So about 7 or 8 months ago, this gentleman I was just referring to got in touch with me. He became a friend of mine through another friend, through another friend. And he said, "Hey, how would you like to co-author a book?" I said, "Well, I never really thought about it. Would you have in mind?" So we got into the discussion, and I will tell you, writing a book is a labor of love. The number of revisions, the times you question yourself, or you have a final version, then you reread it and go, "That's crappy. I'm going to rewrite this." It happens a lot. So when the book was finally published, that was another one of those moments, Alex, where you open the box, you see it's your book, and you co-authored it, and then you get to fill out your Amazon author's profile. It's a dream you think about, but you're not really sure it's ever going to happen. So when it happened, I talked with him about authoring the book on my own, and he's like, "Yeah, let's do that right away." So I'm in the process of writing that now, and I'm hoping mid fall maybe is when it'll come out.
Is there a big difference in the topics between the book that you co-authored versus the book that you're writing for yourself? You don't have to get to the specifics of the one you're currently, but is the
Yeah,
topic similar or different?
yeah, it's similar. The book I'm writing is a lot about, it's going to be called something to the effect of In Search of the Perfect Conversation.
Mhm.
So what does it take to have that perfect conversation with someone? And of course, that's going to change area to area, but there's probably certain things that are very similar. And one of the pieces of that is something I called the 210 rule. And the book that I just co authored, the chapter is on the 210 rule and why that's so important in selling, communication, negotiating, etc.
Do you feel it's easier to write a book that you have more experience on compared to someone who's writing fiction and they got to come up with everything on the spot? And I always like to ask that with authors because people who are really talking about the experiences or things that they really have had experience on, they kind of, it comes naturally to them. Where other kind of genres, it's not as easy because there's more of that planning that goes on.
Yeah, that's a great question. I've never really thought about that. Uh, as a side note, I have a side project where I'm writing a horror story. I think it's going to be a short story, but I would say probably, in my opinion, based on the two I'm doing, I would say they're probably equal because you still have to plan the layout. What
Yeah.
you find is that what I've found is I write big chunks at a time. And then later on, I try to figure out how they squish together. And I would imagine writing a fiction wouldn't be too much different. You have the character development and try to pull them all together. But it seems like people like Stephen King don't have an issue with that.
Yeah, that's we even talked about the planning part, and I was going through stuff in my house, and we wrote these like short stories in younger days. And I'm like looking at the topics that I'm talking about, and I'm thinking, when did I come up with that? Like, what was going on in my mind? But you think about like the horror story that but you are having fun doing that. And I
Oh yeah, it's
think
been great.
it's like something that kind of gets you out of your comfort zone and you really get to like express and really kind of, if you're a fan of those types of movies, you take kind of things you see in those kind of movies and really incorporating your stories. So I always think fiction's the fun because you get to come up with anything as long as it makes sense, but you get to enjoy even on both sides, the nonfiction, the more kind of coaching style books or entrepreneurial style books. All of it's fun as long as you're passionate about it.
Yeah, and I think to your point, the fun side is probably a great way to look at it because we talk business all day, and you're always talking business, but to get away from that is a refreshing break. It's a great point you brought up. I like that very much. So, yeah, I'd go with that theory.
You talked about the last 10 years have been a big part of your story and everything that's been happening.
Yep.
Are you open about it with your kids on the experiences and teaching them things and tricks that you've learned so that maybe they're not going to be doing that in the future or be more prepared about something that you've learned over that time?
Yeah, and you know what? You try to. As a parent, if there's parents listening to this, I'm sure there's a lot of them. You know that you can only tell kids so much, and then they're just kind of, yeah, dad, I buy that, or no, dad, I don't. Or they say, yeah, dad, I buy that, then they go do it anyway. So I do try to impart those things. Right before this podcast, I was on with one of my three daughters, and we were just chatting about something, and we had differing opinions on it. But I think that's part of them growing up, right? They're feeling things out on their own and
Yeah.
they're doing their own thing, and experience was my best teacher. I don't think anybody could stop me from going the direction I went, but now it's a whole different story. So I would say, to answer your question, yes, I definitely do try to impart wisdom. It's a question of whether that wisdom is listened to and absorbed.
You kind of talked about rebuilding your life in the last 10
Yep.
years. If someone that's listening to this interview that's really going through that change for them, rebuilding their life, starting over, what is the first thing you would tell them about what to expect in the future and how it takes time, but stay on track with getting to where you want to get to?
I would say celebrate small victories. If I can put my story in a little bit more context, before I went into that downward spiral, I had spoken all over the world. I had spoken in 6 different countries, 47 states,
Wow.
trained probably 10,000 people. I had everything. And when things started to get a little bit out of control and went to where they went to, and I finally realized I needed to come back and rebuild what I had built before, um, I was anxious. I wanted to happen tomorrow. But what I realized was that I had a chance to build a better quality network. I
Mhm.
had a chance to cherish relationships and make them grow deeper versus trying to broaden them. And I guess I would say to people who are rebuilding your life is keep it in perspective. It takes you a long time to do anything. We always say about how we want to lose weight. Well, it took you a long time to gain the weight. It's going to take you a little while to get it off. And I think it's important to keep that perspective because you can set unrealistic goals. I want to have my business built up and have three new clients by, 2 months from now.
Mhm.
That may not be a reality. As a matter of fact, the current timeline for getting a new client from a newly formed business is between 6 and 9 months. So I think it's important to keep things in perspective. The second thing is do what I call pick your five. Pick five people in your life that want your success almost more than you do. And maybe you're struggling from an addiction, or maybe you were sick, or maybe you got fired from a company and you need to rebuild your life. Pick those five people and talk to almost nobody but them. Try to kick the naysayers out of your life because I'll tell you what, they can put you right back in the position you were in before. Those five people will mean everything. Then, once you build further, ask each of them to refer somebody that they looked up to and talk to them and gradually just rebuild your network. And you're going to find that it's a long game,
Mhm.
but man, the payoff is just so huge.
Stop right there. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss out on all future content. Make sure you also follow on all our social media platforms. You'll see even personalized content on there. Hopefully, you enjoy. Stay tuned for more on this episode. Something that our listeners like to do is really get to know more about the guests. When you're not working, what do you like to do for fun that maybe people don't know you like to do?
Well, most people don't know that I'm a licensed blackjack dealer.
Oh,
So I enjoy dealing cards. I enjoy playing blackjack at the casino. I'm not an avid gambler, but I do like to play some hands once in a while. I love traveling with my wife now, with all the kids out of the house. That's a fun thing to do. But I guess where we spend the most time is my wife and I own a 252-year-old home. It's
oh,
a historic home, and we're bringing it back to its former glory. So we enjoy doing work around the yard and around the house to try and restore it to what it probably was at one time.
I have to go back to the licensed blackjack dealer because I think that's
Sure.
so interesting. When did you want to kind of pursue that? Like get the license and everything? And do you go to the casino and like work there time to time, or how does that all involve? I'm so fascinated about that.
Yeah. No, no problem. Um, when I was going through my divorce, I needed something to keep me busy.
Mhm.
And I had always loved the casino environment. Again, I'm not a gambler, but I like to be at casinos. I like to go to shows. I like to be involved with a crowd. Um, so when I needed something to do, I was looking around and blackjack dealers were getting paid pretty good money. And I thought, hey, why not give it a shot? So for people who want to know, it's a 200-hour class. Yeah, it takes a lot of time to get certified. And then once you get certified, you have to deal in front of pit bosses at a casino, and they have to basically pass you. So it's not just that you pass in front of a teacher, but you go in front of actual pit bosses and they tell you whether you did okay or not. It's nerve wracking. It is
Oh,
really, really nerve wracking. And then because you're working in a casino, you have to make an appointment with the FBI or state police and get fingerprinted. So your fingerprints are in a national database. So it sounds cool, but there's a lot involved. Uh, yeah. And then I applied to local casinos. I never actually took a job at a casino, but I applied to them. We had one in our local area and I thought it would be great. So a friend of mine from class went and he actually did start dealing, and he told me one day, he goes, just don't do it. He said that people are unruly. He said people are slamming the table. They don't tip you well. And I thought, okay, but it's a great skill. So now when my wife and I go to Vegas or Atlantic City, I enjoy sitting down for a number of hands of blackjack.
at least you have experience knowing what that person went through just to get to that job and kind of the background.
Yeah,
So like when you're the person that mentioned about how people act, from their side how to treat them as an individual,
yeah,
as a human, and be respectful to them because they're there doing a job and you're there to
yeah.
enjoy what they're offering.
I'll tell you a quick funny story. My wife and I were dating. We went to Atlantic City and we went to Caesar's Palace. And I was sitting down at the blackjack table. And at one point during the deal, I turned to my then girlfriend and I said, he's not allowed to do that. And the dealer goes, excuse me? I said, you can't do that. And he said, no, that's fine. And I said, call your pit boss over. So he called the pit boss over. The pit boss goes, he's right. You can't do that. So it's one of those things that it's neat to have that little piece of insider information. People ask me all the time, does it give you an edge? I don't think so. I think the casino always has the edge, but it makes it more fun to play.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's with the traveling, do you have a destination spot that's on the bucket list as a family?
Yeah. I would love to go to Japan. I taught Aikido for 20 years, and I have a real fascination with the Japanese culture and the Japanese martial arts. So I would really love to go there. And I don't know if it still runs. I think it does, but I've always had this fantasy about going on the Orient Express.
I have no idea about if it.
It used to be a five-star train that stopped in multiple towns throughout Europe. And I believe it still runs under a different company name, but at one point, it's like 10 grand a person to go on this train. But what you get is five-star accommodations, five-star meals. This train is supposed to be amazing. So that kind of sits at the top of my bucket list. Japan's probably number two.
The final question I'll ask you for someone that's listening to this interview based on your journey and experience, what tips or advice would you give them to overcome obstacles, accomplish their goals, and rise to the challenge?
Listen more. You know, one thing that I've learned a lot over the past 30 years doing this is that what you have to say isn't nearly as important as what you can hear.
Mhm.
And it's amazing when you stop to listen what you can really take away from conversations. So I would say strive to be interested versus interesting. The second thing I would say is at the end of the day, make a habit for yourself of something that makes you feel better. I'll give you an example. One thing that I do is I started this about 10 years ago is right before you go to bed at night, I look in the mirror and I say, I forgive you. You made a ton of mistakes during the day. You're going to make more tomorrow, but you know what? Right now, I forgive you. You're good. And it's amazing what those little tidbits can do.
Jake, I want to thank you so much for coming on the
You're
show,
welcome.
talking about
Thanks for having
your
me.
rise to the challenge. You're inspiring so many people, and we are excited to see what the future looks like for you.
Thank you very much for having me, Alex. It was a true pleasure being here.
Stop right there. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss out on all future content. Make sure you also follow on all our social media platforms. You'll see even personalized content on there. Hopefully, you enjoy. Stay tuned for more on this episode.